Use dependency injection in .NET Core is easy. ASP.NET Core has it baked in. Hi there, how are you doing today? Let's talk about dependency injection in .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. This is the second episode in this series. If you don't know what a dependency injection is, or if you're not convinced it is a good pattern to follow, I highly recommend you to check out the first video, where we talk about the concepts, the theories, and the benefits. I'll put a link on the right upper corner. Now let's dive in. Here are the steps to use the dependency injection in .NET Core application. First, add the package Microsoft extensions .dependency injection. Then have a service container or service collection. Sometimes it is called the dependency injection container as well. Next, register your services into the container. A console outputter services that implements IOutputter, for example. Now, if you build a service provider, you can resolve a service from within the service collection. For example, here I am trying to resolve IOutputter. Once I have the service of IOutputter, I can decide to either inject it into different classes or I can use it directly. Let me call the write line on IOutputter here, and let's debug to see how it works. Oh, there's a typo. Actually, let me do it in the right way. I'm adding some breakpoints to inspect how it works step by step. On line 13, we created the service collection. This is a kind of like a container, a box. We can put an item in the box. Each item is called a service descriptor. If we hover over the service collection, we can see there is the 0 item in it at this moment. While I step through line 16, it starts to add service descriptor into the service collection. There are two key information in it. The service type is IOutputter, and the implementation type is console outputter. Line 19 is relatively long. What does it do is it firstly builds a service provider out of a service collection. And then we call getRequiredService method on the service provider to get an instance of IOutputter. Finally, the writeLine method on the outputter is called to output the text. Now if I step into writeLine method, you'll see it is a console.writeLine, the actual implementation that has been called, and the actual output is in the console. Okay, we just create a service collection, register the very first service. And you probably notice IOutputter service is one of the simple ones that doesn't have any dependency. Now let's take a look at a slightly complex but more typical case, the DogReport. As we discussed before, DogReport have three dependencies: a dog, an ILogger, and an IOutputter. The dog is the data to output. The ILogger and the outputters are services. To make the services injected by .NET Core service collector, we need to put them onto the constructor. Although there are several places that a dependency injection could happen, like on the constructor or a method or on a property, the service collector that we are using in Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection only supports the injection on the constructor. So we're going to move the ILogger and the IOutputter to be injected from the constructor. This is always the first step. Once the dependencies are injected, the first thing to do in the constructor is to save them to a field so that the members in this class will have access to those services. Actually, it is so widely used that both Visual Studio and VS Code supports generating code for things like that. Now it is ready. Let's go back and try to register DogReport and see how can we consume them. Let me follow the pattern to register the service of DogReport here. And instead of resolve IOutputter, I'm going to resolve the DogReport. Actually, let me make the build of the provider a separate step. It's called getRequiredService on the service provider. And once we get the service of DogReport, it's called print on it. Yeah, of course, we need to create the dog object. Let's have our Chihuahua dog Bella here. Hitting F5 for debugging. Now we registered 2 services. And then we build the service provider and get a DogReport out of it. Oh no, it failed. Don't panic yet. Let's read the exception carefully. Unable to resolve service for type blah 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 ILogger while attempting to activate DogReport. This is actually the exception that we're going to hit sooner or later if we work with dependency injection in .NET Core. The first type in the error message is actually the dependency of the second type. In this case, ILogger is a dependency for DogReport. And what is it saying is, the DogReport is missing a dependency of ILogger. Let's see how did it happen. At the very beginning, we have an IOutputter in the service collector already. After we update the DogReport to move the dependencies onto the constructors, we registered it. As we know, DogReport has 2 dependencies, IOutputter and ILogger. IOutputter is registered in the previous example. It could be resolved correctly, but we have never registered ILogger. When the service collector tried to inject an instance of ILogger into DogReport, it failed. Based on this analysis, the fix is as simple as register an ILogger. Once the ILogger is in the picture, the activation of DogReport will success. Okay, let's fix the code. Start debugging again. This time, finger crossed. Whew, it worked. Now let's see if dog could be printed successfully. And here's our dog Bella. We're going to move to look into dependency injections in ASP.NET Core next. Before that, I want to review the steps that we use a dependency injection in a plain .NET Core application. It is important to understand these exact steps are applied in ASP.NET Core. The difference is only coming down from ASP.NET Core handles a lot of boilerplate for us. The concept behind it never changes. So the first step is to create a service collection, then register the services. Once the services, the dependencies of them included, are all registered in the service collection, it is time to build a service provider. Once we have the service provider, it's then for us to call getService methods on it to get concrete service instances. During the getting of the services, all the dependencies of the service, if there's any, will be injected automatically. Alright, I think we are ready to move on. Let's start by creating an ASP.NET Core Web API application. The main method, the entry for the whole program, calls create host builder. Stay with me a little bit. I'll explain why this is relevant. Here, pay attention to the tooltip for create default builder, because this one explains what does it do under the hood. Out of all these different things, pay attention to this ILogger factory. That is actually a service that will be used for injecting ILogger. I'll explain later. Another spot that is interesting is actually this use startup method, as well as the type of startup that it's referring to. This startup class is usually the first class that most people will modify to finish their task. Let's take a look at how it looks like. On the top is the constructor of the startup. It has a parameter of iConfiguration. Guess what? That is injected. Then there's a method called configure services. This one is important to know because it has a parameter of type iServiceCollection. And yes, that's the interface that we can register our own services. Here, add controller and add swagger gen are all methods registering multiple services. It is a common pattern for ASP.NET Core application to register related service in an external method. Before we go deeper, let's take a look at the controller in the template. This weather forecast controller has a dependency called ILogger of weather forecast controller. It is injected on the constructor. Do you find this pattern familiar? This is just like we see the docs rely on iSerializer or iOutputter, right? We read the code. We didn't see ILogger being registered. How could this work? Will it have the exception like the one we had before? Still remember we read create default builder method, and in it registers the ILogger factory. This ILogger factory is responsible for creating anything that requests ILogger of T. In case of a weather forecast controller, ILogger of weather forecast controller is provided and injected. That is basically how ASP.NET Core works with dependency injection. We don't need to create the service collection manually. We don't need to build the service provider of the service collection manually, but the dependency injection still works. Okay, let's take a look at how will we do the DogReport. Again, but this time in ASP.NET Core. First, I will just copy over all those related classes. The serializer 1 requires the Newtonsoft.json. Let's add the reference to the package. Now, let's find the spot to register the service of a DogReport. And to register the dependencies of DogReport as well, so that when DogReport is requested, the service provider would know what to resolve and inject into the DogReport. Let's see how to inject it into the controller. Just like what we have been doing to the dependencies, the first step is to put it on the constructor. And then we'll create a field to hold the service. Correct the naming style a little bit. And I'll add a null check. Now that we know DogReport will be injected, we can use it in the methods. Well, let's create our Chihuahua Bella again. Let me set a breakpoint and start the debugging. On the startup class, we hit the spot where we start to registering the DogReport and its dependencies. Although I have breakpoints in the controller, they won't be hit until we request the proper route. Let's hit it in the browser. Here it is. Because we registered the DogReport and its dependencies, it will be injected into this controller. Let's move on to the code that it is used. In the console, we see the output of the dog Bella here. Alright, that's it for today. We started with an example in .NET Core console application. There we touched the 4 steps to use the dependency injection. They are creating a service collection, register the services, build the service provider, resolve injection and use. Then we see an example how dependency injection is integrated with ASP.NET Core application. Within it, we only need to focus on the steps of registering the services and the injection and use them. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please press the like button to let me know. Subscribe so you won't miss the next video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.